Delighted to be here again. Given what he's just said, let me tell you, in Britain we call it bog off. Buy one, get one free. Because as well as moderating, I'm moderating my own subject. And can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. And what I've been doing, and the reason why this is coming down is because of, it's not just an article, it's actually a 2-year study I've been doing about thinking the unthinkable, which was really stimulated by what happened when Russia invaded Crimea just over 2 years ago, violating sovereign territory, and then we had issues like, we had ISIS suddenly appearing from nowhere in Mosul, we had Ebola, which the World Health Organization said was not going to be a problem. We then had the sudden 60% reduction in oil prices, which has become an existential threat created by Saudi Arabia on itself. And since then, we've had migration in the European Union and so many other things. But what I need to do is share with you over the next 10 minutes what the conclusions have been of our findings before Brexit and before Trump. And what I'd like you to do is use your handset, whatever you've got, as you sit there, just giving me some ideas of what's on your mind. It's going to be up there on the left-hand side, the right-hand side as well. But use that as well to get thoughts over to me. Now, I have to apologize. I've got an enormous amount to get through in order to give you a sense of what we've uncovered from literally hundreds of interviews with chief executives, with chairmen of boards, with senior public servants, not just in Britain, but all around the world. And it's really scary. I'm going to summarize in 9.5 minutes now the kind of conclusions we've come to. And they are deeply troubling. I've put that on a red background because really this is a red alert. It could be that the three panelists are going to disagree or somehow qualify what I'm going to say to you. But remember, all this is backed by methodology. It's backed by data, 2,500 pages of transcript with those who are in positions of responsibility. Almost all of them ask for anonymity. But I put to them, thinking the unthinkable. What's on your mind? What is troubling you? What is making life very difficult for you? And what about the future ahead? And how, above all, do you prepare for what's coming smartly? And the overwhelming view, and this goes back now 18 months, is that most in positions of power and responsibility simply can't understand the enormity of the unthinkables coming down the track. Look at what the IMF said just a few days ago about what's happening in the economy, unleashing a global revolt, negative economic and political forces at work. This has implications for all of those of you involved in risk registers. Why are many of the things we're going to talk about tonight simply not on corporate risk registers? Only this week, in another European capital, I was with a corporate risk officer, a chief risk officer, who was saying, I can't put many of these unthinkables on the risk register of my company because the chairman and the chief executive don't want them there, because otherwise we'll not be able to address them. In other words, they want green boxes all the time for risk, as opposed to embracing what may be coming down the track. We've been doing an enormous amount of behind-the-scenes brainstorming, mainly with chairman and chief executives, often with others as well in the private investment business, big families who are investing in major corporates. Let me report to you what came out of one big meeting about 3 weeks ago, and I can tell you the mood is shifting dramatically here. Quote, "The system will be fundamentally disrupted. We must prepare ourselves. What if everything we assume is simply not enough?" Now, President Obama, in his last remarks to the UN General Assembly, talked about governing being more difficult, tensions quicker to surface. Principles of open markets and accountable democracy can no longer be guaranteed. A new tension between democracy and the highest level instincts for control. Explosions in social media. But overall, it's about the old assumptions, the old normal, no longer being valid. There is now a new normal, however ill-defined, and that's at the heart of what we're talking about tonight. Whether you're talking about Russia, whether you're talking about China, whether you're talking about oil prices and the existential threat now to the stability of the European Union, who would have been talking about that 6 months ago? And then, of course, what's happening in the United States at the moment. I was in Singapore recently, and this was on the record, so I can report it to you, where I'm also now a visiting professor. And the title of a session at the Singapore Summit was "Unsettled, Unpredictable, Is Mediocre Growth the Only Certainty?" On the record, Singapore's Deputy Prime Minister Tharman saying in public, there's a new helplessness and despondency. This from cautious, rarely overstated Singapore. Plenty of pessimism. Someone like him talking about a new funk in leadership, confirming, fortunately, much of what I'm bringing to you tonight. And the kind of things we're hearing now from very senior leaders, this new volatile world of the last 2 years and how it's affecting every calculation in the board, that from a very senior banker. Complacency is now the enemy, not laziness. Populism, which we all know about, and even more remarkably, coming from very senior figures, the kind of people who I've now been tracking for a year and a half, who a year ago would not have even said anything like this, who are now saying, we're now in danger as a corporate of creating angry consumers and angry citizens by our policies as corporates. And Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, underscored that yesterday at the opening of the growth, the sport summit. What is in it for me, as he put it in his remarks. So what we're seeing is, quote, embeddedness of systems in corporates is now becoming the enemy. You may want to disagree. So where are we going in pure headline terms? These two words are coming through from our work: purpose and values. Not value, but values. What is the purpose now of corporates? What is the purpose of governments as well? And secondly, values, not the financial value, but the values, the social responsibility. I've heard very senior, very big investors saying, we're not so interested in the quarterly numbers anymore. We want to know what you as a company stand for. Hence that remark from a very senior corporate figure: we are in danger of creating angry consumers and citizens, particularly the next generation, who don't like what they see in a lot of companies and therefore won't buy our products. And remember, I'm summarizing at high speed here the takeaways. We're talking now about executive leadership at the highest levels of corporate, public service and political life, facing new vulnerabilities that few in those positions are willing to talk about or admit to publicly. And in 2016, they are now greater than at any time in recent history. And I hope that'll come out as well in the session that follows. It's not necessarily a failure of leadership. It's the failing not to identify, accept, and recalibrate according to this new reality, which really, in many ways, started about 2.5 years ago. And a principal finding is this: the conformity which gets you to the top of a government or gets you to the top of a corporate, in many ways disqualifies you now from understanding the enormity of what is taking place and what is therefore needed. Many of those we've spoken to are frankly scared at their responsibilities, particularly their legal responsibilities, and what the implications are going to be for customers, consumers, and their shareholders. Something big is changing, and just to underscore, all this is documented and fully approved methodologically within our document, Thinking the Unthinkable, and there is the URL at the bottom. And as well, for the London conference of Chatham House back in London, back in June, Chatham House decided this was going to be the cartoon to encapsulate the enormity of what is changing, leaders blindfolded and groping their way forward. What are the main findings we are coming up with? That it's about the need for a new culture, mindset, and behavior. Not about recalibrating systems with new procurement, but changing the human software up there. And above all, look at what I've just deleted, thinking the unthinkable. It's actually, the problem is thinking the unpalatable. The evidence is out there for all these crises, whether it be NATO's problems with Russia, or what was happening with ISIS, what was happening with the 60% reduction in oil prices. The migration warnings have been out there for 2 years for Europe, but it was unpalatable for those at the top to even think and embrace. What is the new challenge in all of this? What's the scale of challenge? Let me encapsulate it with this quote from Chris Donnelly, Director for the Institute of Statecraft. He said, the rate of change we're going through at the moment is comparable to what happens in wartime. Wartime. Yet we think we're at peace. The global pace of change is overcoming the capacity of national and international institutions. Emphasis there on capacity. And a former very senior British civil servant said, and he then left the civil service shortly after describing this to us. He said, what we're facing inside government now is the fact that most people don't want to take responsibility. And he came up with this dreadful word. There's a de-responsibilization going on, and put that to chairmen and chief executives and also to public servants. And they say that is what we feel in our jobs at the moment. I am highlighting and doing it in a very stark way at the moment, but what we're talking about there is what one senior official described to us, as well as in the corporate sector, as a new frozen middle, which means much of the unpalatable information is simply not getting to the top. So let me close with these 9 points, and I'll go back to the top, and you can read them one by one. After de-responsibilization, it's the fact that most are being overwhelmed by multiple intense pressures, which are totally outside the conformist way in which they have been qualifying themselves in their jobs up to this point. Secondly, and what we're doing is here synthesizing what so many people have told us. We're talking about the dangers now, the embedded nature of institutional conformity, which means much of the unthinkable nature of what is happening is simply not getting into the framing of the system. There's now willful blindness, there's groupthink, there's risk aversion, there's fear of making career-limiting moves, and that's a real constraint on a lot of people. They don't want to lose their jobs, particularly in this current economic environment. Reactionary mindsets, cognitive overload, and denial. Some of you may say there are 158,000 books on leadership out there. We haven't read them all. We've only read a very small proportion of them. You may say, well, that's been around for 30 years. The fact is, in this digital environment and this environment of accountability, that now becomes a very serious issue in terms of tension with the public and the citizens and the consumers. So the theme for the next 2.5 hours, 2.75 hours is so what? What next? What are the solutions? I don't want to be too prescriptive at the moment, but these are the kind of things that are emerging as 3 things which have to be created in order to understand and flex to handle at the speed that it's happening what is now taking place. Firstly, courage. Far too many people at the top are confirming to us that they are being less than courageous because they've got to keep the show on the road. A degree of humility as well, what Klaus Schwab described yesterday as modesty, and above all, creating a safe space in which this can be handled, where reputations and careers can remain intact while these fundamental issues, existential issues, can be addressed. Because that's my last thought to you. There are those at the top who are saying this is existential as a threat for both companies and governments in this new environment of unthinkables. So let me pause there. I've provoked you, I've probably angered some of you, I've probably irritated some of you, but that's the basis for discussion this evening. And as I say, all of it is data which is published, including with all the footnotes of who said what, when.